Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport in right relationship to your life.
Hello there, listeners. After over 2 years of recording and 80 plus episodes, I am elated to announce that Enduro Bearings has agreed to become a supporter of the Cycling in Alignment podcast. This is a double win for you, the audience. You have the opportunity to demonstrate your support of the show by making a purchase on the website cycling.endurobearings.com, and you get to save some dollars while you trick out your whip. Use the code Colby Podcast to receive a 35% discount on any of Enduro Bearings' excellent products. That's Colby Podcast, which is all lowercase and all one word. This includes the excellent XD15 ceramic bottom bracket, which is guaranteed for life. That means it may outlive you because, well, it's inanimate. Enduro also makes headsets, derailleur pulleys, as well as bearings for just about everything that rotates on a bicycle. So use your digits to make the keyboard mudras and head over to cycling.endurobearings.com and upgrade your favorite ride now. And remember, the proper number of bicycles is always N+1, so think ahead. Thanks for listening.
Cool. And tell me, are you in your studio or is that your home?
Yeah, this is my house. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
And remind everyone where you live.
I live in Glasgow, Scotland. Currently, I'm Scottish. I've been here all my life. So.
Okay. Home of the UCI Super Worlds this year.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, I'm looking forward.
Yeah. So that's an interesting concept because I started racing in 1989. It was my first year as a junior.
Right.
And, all these worlds didn't exist back then. It was road and track.
Yeah.
Nothing else existed. And they did them, I think in 1986, they had worlds in Colorado Springs. They had track worlds there and they had road worlds there, if I remember correctly.
Right.
I think.
Right.
I want to say Kia Pucci won the men's road race. Is that right? No, that's not right. Who was it? Some Italian. Anyway, and Kia Pucci was much later. So anyway, but then they separated track and road worlds, and then all the other world championships started cropping up, and we had mountain bike worlds that cropped up in, I think the first one were in Durango in Colorado in like 1990 or thereabouts, right? And now we've got gravel worlds, mountain bike worlds. Then we had. And back then, there was no U23s. It was just juniors. Yeah. And then at the age of 19, it was straight to the wolves. You were racing with pros,
right.
Which was nuts. Anyway, so now this is the first time the UCI is doing what they call, I guess it's colloquially called Super Worlds, right? So they're having, I don't think everything is there actually, though. Is that correct?
The only one I've got earmarked as the road race. It's split over a few weeks. I'm not sure off the top of my head. That's the only one I've got in the diary anyway.
Yeah.
But I think there's a women's road race another week, and then I'm not sure if the time trial's here or no. I'm not sure. Off the top.
I think it is. I'm pretty sure, but yeah, I'm woefully underprepared for research on that part of this. But anyway, it should be interesting to see how that event goes and how it plays out. Yeah, that's cool. It's good. But just like any event that is that big, I think it becomes difficult to deal with because logistics, the number of people, the number of athletes and support staff and organizing committee and the volunteers required, it just becomes like the Olympics, right?
It'll be interesting. I mean, I think my plan is to head through to Edinburgh in the morning and then hopefully get a spot on the Crow Road, which is a local climb to here that they're going over, and then maybe try and get into Glasgow as well. So I've not really looked at the logistics of it yet myself. We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see what happens. I think it's going to be very busy. So we'll need to play it by ear. But that's my plan for now anyway.
You could ride from your house or from somewhere local to the course, though. It's that close.
I could, yeah, yep,
yeah,
yep, quite easily. Yeah,
that's the way to do it, right? Whenever there's big events, you just get on your bike and then you're free to navigate. Cool. Yeah, cool.
And getting in and out of the city as well. It's they've introduced this emissions zone in the city centre, so I think it's probably not a bad idea. Bike in the train out of town, catch the end. Eventually something like that. So,
yeah, you're in that part of the world where you guys have reliable public transportation. We don't have a lot of that in the U.S.
Right.
a little bit.
It's not too bad here because I'm probably 10 minutes for the town or something. So it's fairly reliable and frequent. So should be.
Yeah. Nice. I've had the good fortune to spend some time in Japan in the last few years, and the train system there is obviously insane, and it just changes the way your life works because you can just go all kinds of places without cars. It's just a different way to think about things.
Yeah. That would be awesome.
So thanks so much for making time to come on the pod today. Let's give people a bit more background and context. So tell people who you are. You're one of my fitting colleagues. You're a Steve Hogg certified bike fitter.
Yeah.
Well,
I've been fitting now for, I think, a decade this month. I think 10 years this month. And it was the usual sort of journey coming to fitting, really. I mean, lots of issues myself, try to sort of find good information about how to solve your problems, and I think that's kind of always been my nature, is to be quite inquisitive, try and fix problems, try to find the best way to solve problems, and that led me to Steve, and it kind of opened my eyes to a different way of thinking about fitting, and then down the rabbit hole I went, and then that just led. It was kind of organically led to me starting to fit myself. It was suggested to me, it wasn't even really my idea to start fitting. And I thought about it, and I thought, when I looked about at the time 10 years ago, I thought, if I have to travel to England to get fitted, then there's scope here in Scotland to do something more in line with how I see it, the philosophy of fit as I would sort of see it, as I would practice it. So, and then it all started there, and that's just been it ever since. It's just evolved. So that's how I've got to where I'm, very briefly.
And how did you discover Steve's work? Did you find him for a while he was doing articles on cycling? Cycling tips? Or was it cycling news? Cycling news.
I think it was the blog. I think it was his blog initially. And it was the foot correction stuff initially that really, piqued my interest, and I think I potentially wrote this on his site in my bio. When I was a kid and I was riding bikes, I was thinking about this stuff even then. My foot never felt correct in the pedals. I could sprint and run, and I could do these things, and the bike just the sort of the feet on the pedals never felt right, and I've always been thinking about wedging and things like that, and that kind of led me to Steve. And when I read his articles on it kind of made sense. It made a lot of sense to me. So, and from there, I just started to digest that site. I don't know how many times I read it back to front, but it was a lot anyway. And it really started to think, because it changes the way you think, and that was it. That was my kind of entrance into it, really. Feet kind of, the feet were the problem. So that was the kind of way in, I think, for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a fit yesterday with a client, and I actually told him this. I said, when I trained with Steve, I really only learned one thing, which is obviously not totally correct. It's a simplistic way to look at it, but it's that bio-individuality rules dominates everything in bike fitting. And that's just it, right? Is people want to systematize things and have a one-size-fits-all solution, whatever, a Giro shoe or a physique shoe or a specialized shoe, blah, blah, blah. And that just...
I mean, I think Steve's stuff, I really... I think he says in his... I don't read his site anymore. I'm not on it, but, I remember, I think somewhere on the site he says, one of the least read articles on his site is the basic premise. And I've always really sort of thought that article, for me, sort of summarises, bike fitting particularly well as a starting point for every single fit that you undertake, rather than coming at it. I've got a lot of my ideas about fitting and why it's the way it is and everything else, but it seems to me that everybody's trying to reverse engineer things that can't be reverse engineered. You can reverse engineer bridges, you can reverse engineer structures, you can write on a piece of paper, this material has these properties if I want to build this bridge and I want it to sustain this load and take these forces. I can write it all out, I can predict the outcome and it's going to work. And I can sort of reverse engineer that, but with fitting doesn't work like that, because what you end up is a bioelectrical signaling system, and a human being try to interact with properties that are predictable, and to try and squeeze them the square into the circle, you're destined to fail. You're doomed. It might work some of the time, but if you don't have a starting point as in the basic premise or a fundamental understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve and how you're going to set about it. And Steve sort of has highlighted, he began my thinking, for a brain-based approach. I would call it a brain-based approach to fitting. So what is going on here, and the three things that I really agree with, Steve's taken things as, to achieve this hypothetical ideal position, you need to reduce these challenges to the system: positional, functional, neurological. And if you take this standpoint, in my opinion, you chip away at these things, and you end up with for that specific rider function, the way their brain works, on that day. You're working towards an ideal solution for that person. So rather than a hypothetical ideal set by God knows who from God knows where, this is how it should be, you're working. And so this kind of made me start thinking about, things for a neurological standpoint, so a brain-based approach. So, right, and I, in the first 5 years of fitting, got really quite good at fixing things with the limited capacity that we've got, which is, positioning the saddle and putting the saddle in a specific place, the bars in a specific place, cleats in a specific place, that allow that rider to function as symmetrically as they can on the bike. And in the last 5 years, I would say I've acquired skills that allow me to help the person function better and more symmetrically on the bike. We're less of a need for mechanical intervention, if you like, and shims and these sort of things. So, and the more I do it, the more I learn, the more I'm convinced that that's the way to go about it, and it's been quite a journey, and it kind of kicked. It was started there. It kicked. It began there, and the more I thought about it, and so I spent a long time thinking about bike fitting. All day, every day, for years on end. Running through these permutations, and I think you would call it critical thinking. I think that's how I think about fitting. When I try to weigh up whether it be should you employ a piece of technology or not, or should I look at things from this point of view or not, and how I approach it. So, and it's led me, I think, 10 years on to my own ideas about fitting, and I'm sure you're the same, and I'm sure Neil's the same, and all the guys are the same in this. It's like a foundation to build on, and I think it's been a very good foundation to build on. So to understand things intellectually and to think through and have a good understanding of what it is you're trying to do, and then applying it and getting experience and learning and dealing with these difficult clients and dealing with these difficult problems and developing your own philosophy of it, I suppose, you could say, like, this is how I sort of think about it these days. And I've got lots of ideas about fit, it's just what happens that I think at the end of the day, So, I mean, yesterday, I had a guy in yesterday, and his saddle was 25 mil too low or something. Young guy, he was like 22 years old, and he was sitting on the bike, spinal flexed, had a wee short stem on, bars low, and I actually took a video. I'm in a new studio just now, and I took a video. I thought I need to, start getting some content out or whatever, and so yesterday was all about, physiologically he had the potential to sit in the bike really nicely, really well. So it was things like, it ended up coaching him how to sit in the bike. You'll do this yourself. I think the skill with fitting is knowing when you can do that, when you should do that, whether you can do that, or whether to do something else, like this person's not really capable of.
It's not going to land.
Yeah. You might need 3 shots at this guy, getting them to do what you want to do. But what was interesting about this young guy is he's basically got no control of his body. Like, he can't send a signal for his brain to a part. So I had him sitting on the chair, and I was wanting him to do some spine waves. So I wanted him to just posteriorly rotate his pelvis on the chair, and only that. And he can't do it. So, and I can't get him to anteriorly rotate. I can't get him to posteriorly. I can't get him to protract his scapula. Yeah. So I'm coaching him to roll forward, roll back, and it's testing for him, and he's being challenged, and he's, I don't know. And I'm like, listen, mate, stick with me. I'm not doing this to, you've got the capability here. I know you do. Just go with us. And so I got him to, bend at the hip and bend his elbows and keep his back straight on the bike and not sitting at, flexed, and whoosh, whoosh. It's like, flipping this guy in the bike back, cues, touches thoracic spine, get him to move his scapula, put him into the position he's going to be on the bike that and then let him go and ride outside on the road where he'll fall into this position. And, I took an after video, and it's night and day, and it's this brain thing, like training people to, when necessary, be aware of where their body is in space, I suppose, getting them to connect their brain to their body, it's like, and without that, you're struggling to get a result for this guy, I think, on the day.
I would agree. Yeah. I find myself coaching athletes a lot about their posture on the bike, and one of the things I learned from my Qigong teacher is sort of the concept that simply where your attention goes, the Qi flows, right?
Right.
So when we coach our athletes to actually get clued in, we give them that range of anterior, posterior, pelvic tilt, and we give them the extremes. I do a similar drill with people when they come in and they're pedaling, at toe down at 45 degrees or whatever. Yeah. So I have a drill where I have them ride for 30 seconds at what I call ballet toes, which would be like a vertical foot, like to a ridiculous degree.
Right.
Then I have them do 30 seconds of the opposite, which I call Frankenstein feet.
Right.
I ask him to listen, like, what happens when you drop your heels excessively? You feel your knees kind of almost locking, you feel your hips moving, maybe you feel some other weird stuff. You feel a lack of fluidity in the pedal stroke, of course.
Yep. And
then I give those extremes numbers. I call ballet feet 10 and Frankenstein 0. And then I say, okay, I want you to pedal at a 3 would be typical for me. Yep. And then it helps him to find that range. But I agree, like, if we come in and just move the points in space, the bars, the stem, or the bars and the pedals, cleats, whatever, we put on different length cranks, we move the saddle up, down, fore, aft, etc. And then we just expect their posture to change. I think that's unrealistic.
Totally. And you know what? It's interesting because I'm not sure if we've spoken about this before or not, but it was something in fitting that I learned. And that I wasn't really, I don't know if I was expecting it. And it really brought home the message. So I've been watching cycling since I was like 5 years old or something. So for me, it was Robert Miller in the 80s, in a polka dot jersey. I was 5 years old in 83 or whatever. And that was it. I was like captured by it all. And I've been looking at people on bikes and riding bikes and everything ever since. And so I think I foolishly, assumed that everybody knows what people look like on bikes and, and that, it's not a natural activity. We've not evolved to do it. And the message really came home with me. I had a client one time, and I think he'd sitting in an office, they decided they were going to ride London to Paris or whatever it was. And he's, well, I need to get a bike fit. And he came in and he was so unstable in the saddle. I'd never seen anything like it. I'm almost involuntarily burst out laughing. I just laughed at this guy. I was like, what are you doing? Like, I was like, what are you doing? I was like, and I was scratching my head. I was just, what is this? What is this? What is this? So I put him on a Draken, and I must have played about with his saddle height for, I don't know, 25 minutes, half an hour, something like this. And I wasn't sure. And I put him in a position, and I went away, and he messaged me maybe a week later, and he says, "Oh, I'm getting pressure on the saddle, whatever." And I was, well, that's not, you shouldn't be. So you need to come back in. Mm-hmm. But I had spent time with him, and I got on. I says, "Look, this is what we're looking for: nice stable pelvis. This doesn't move. The legs produce the power. The torso's nice and relaxed. This is how we move." So anyway, comes back. 2 weeks for the fit, gets on the jig or the whatever it was, the trainer, and he's rock solid. They're just rock solid on the bike. He's massive. He was overextended. I think his seat was maybe 15 mil too high. I dropped his seat, tweak. Mm-hmm. Looked great. Away he went. Done it. And I just, it was like a big sledgehammer. It was like, wow, like this was the kind of the penny dropping for me. It was, he needed shown visual. This is what you should look like. This is what should be happening.
Yeah.
And he's went away, and it's and that sort of visual processing system, that seeing things, processing it, and then repeating it. It just hadn't dawned on me that was a thing. It really drove that home, and started me thinking, about these things. And I'll never forget it. It was just an incredible transformation. And all I'd done was show him what I was looking for. And he went away, and that was that. But it occurred to me that he just, he'd never looked at anybody on a bike. He'd never ridden a bike. It was just something. It was, we'll go and do that for charity, and right, cool. Let's do it. What do I need? I need a bike fit. I need whatever, and that was it. So
that's so interesting. It makes me think of different styles of learning, right?
Totally.
And some people have obviously very visual connections. Some are more auditory. Some are more kinesthetic. And so he obviously had a strong relationship between the visual identification of the pattern. He was able to replicate it. Some people can do that. You show them a dance move or whatever, You just do it once, and they're like, "Oh, I can do that." And other people are like, "Well, have no idea," smacking themselves in the face. And to go back to what you were saying earlier about sometimes you feel into a client and you can see that they need some coaching. But you always have to meet the client where they're at. And sometimes you start to poke there and they're like, there's a little resistance. So then there becomes this discussion like, okay, how do I make a case for this person to buy in to what I'm doing? Which in a more esoteric way, how I think about it, honestly, is like, how do we get our chakras spinning on the same wavelength?
Yeah.
We have to be spinning the same direction and the same rhythm. And then all of a sudden it's like, and I'm not trying, I shouldn't say trying. It's not a mission. It's not a convincing. It's not salesmanship. It's more like, let's look at this person eye to eye energetically and let them know that I'm here to help them. Like honestly here to help them. I'm not here with an agenda. I'm not here to sell them shit. I'm not here to I'm here to give them my energy and time, my input. They're here to learn and give me money for that time and energy. That's an agreed upon exchange. Anyway, then you meet them where they're at and you coach them. And then part of that feeling in is figuring out, intuiting, does this person need visual cues? Or are they more auditory? Or are they more kinesthetic? Or do they have some other learning means? I just use an iPad and I take video all the time.
Right.
And it's funny. Sometimes you show them video and they're like, oh, I've never seen myself on a bike before, which isn't that common. Or it's not that uncommon, I should say. Unless you have mates that ride with you and are like filming you all the time. When would you see or you ride a trainer with a mirror?
Totally.
Other than the form check, when you're riding downtown and you go past the financial district, past all the fancy glass buildings, you look. Other than that, if you don't have buddies with iPhones that like to film stuff.
Totally.
Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, when I went to Australia and trained with Steve and I got on the bike and he says, you're just slightly twisting and dropping that right hip, and I was like, oh, well, I thought it was the left, And that's what I say to clients. So I tell them like, so anyway, we gets to the end of a couple of weeks or whatever, and get Steve on the bike and he's pedaling away, and I was like, you're dropping and twisting to the left, Steve, and he's like, really? I thought I was dropping and twisting to the right, and well, if we can't get it right, what was everybody else got? Of knowing what we're doing on what we're doing on the bike, So,
that's a great story.
So
Steve Hogg doesn't know quite what his own hips are doing.
I mean,
there you go.
I say this to people all the time. You don't know what you look like on the bike, what's happening on the bike. You might think you do.
Yeah.
The fit is the answer. A good set of eyes on you is the answer for sure.
Yep. One of my hashtags that I've never actually used on Instagram, but I say out loud, is I film butts for a living, because that's literally what you're doing, is just taking videos of people's hips while they're riding.
Totally.
And then part of my coaching is people say, oh, wow, okay, I am dropping. And you explain to them, okay, you're rotating and this is a spiral pattern. And that means this shoulder's forward and you probably have more weight on this hand and all those things that typically go along with it, or atypically don't if you have someone who's breaks the pattern, which happens all the time, but they're still twisted. And so you say to them, they're like, well, how do I know when I'm doing this? And so I give them this list of cues. I'm like, okay, what's in your cockpit? What can you look at? You can look at the knees relative to the top tube. You can look at how your hands are placed on the hoods. Is one a little deeper, etc. You can feel your shoulders. That's easier to feel than your hips on the saddle. Yeah. So
it's funny. It's funny you're saying this. I mean, I don't know how many people have come in with hoods like this, and I'm like, your hood's off, and they're like, is it? And I'm like, it's really off. Like, it's so obvious that it's off. And they're like, oh, I don't know. But what you're saying about intuition, I mean, I really like this as well, and how invested you are in the fit, because you sound a lot like me in that sense that I've said this to people. There's not a single fit I've ever went into that hasn't been 100%. Like, here's all of me. I'm here to meet you. You give me as much as you've got, and you'll get as much out of this as possible. And there is a kind of, the fit time flies past before you know, but it's an investment in both parts. And I've got better over the years at mold, becoming malleable to certain people, you know, feeding off, like you say, right, what is this person, where is this person at here, and then meeting them with either their expectations or, you know, having to change my approach. And there definitely is something in that. And I think it's this thing with one-on-one. So when you work one-on-one with a person for that amount of time, it's a different experience to, you know, a job doing whatever, you know. There's this, it's a particular exchange of energy, as you say, that is it's interesting. It's and it does provide results, you know, I find.
Yeah.
And you get that investment, equal investment, you know, people meeting your enthusiasm, meeting your will to do well in the fit. It's how you get results, I think, as well. So
Yeah. So I have to ask you one related thing before we actually get to what we wanted to talk about today. If that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it was you who suggested that I check out the Gelu saddles that are made in Portugal. Was that you? Or was that a different fitter in our network? I can't recall now. Maybe it was, I don't think it was Neil. Maybe it was Tim. Do you remember? Are you familiar with those saddles?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I don't think it was me.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking about that in relation to hips and feeling where they are and that relationship. And Neil and I had a good conversation about those saddles. Have you experienced them or worked with them much?
No, I haven't.
Ah, okay. All right.
And so would you recommend trying them out?
I would. Yeah, I'm going to do a bit more content specifically around them and the SMPs and the differences. I mean, I don't know what your experience is in the landscape of saddles, but I have an overwhelming dominance of solutions. Final solutions for men end up being SMPs. And that's not, I really try to not push that. You know, I tell people transparently, like, my goal is not to sell you a saddle, one or the other, whether I carry it or not. It's to get the best solution for you.
Yep.
But I carry SMPs because they're commonly a solution for men. Women, I would say men, it's like somewhere in the high 80s for the number of riders who come through my door who end up walking out on an SMP, or at least trying a few and then end up on one finally. Women, it's less. It's probably 70s.
Yep.
But the Gelu's a really interesting concept. So just so everybody knows, in the past, I've talked about these saddles on my pod, and they're made in Portugal. They're carbon fiber. They look like they would be a hatchet. They look pretty dreadful, but they're actually quite amazing. They fit the shape of the ischium quite well in my experience, but they also have a lot of compliance built into the shell. And then there's a couple models that use almost like a wave spring, like an old Brooks coil saddle that has that spring that goes in the behind. So they made that out of carbon. And so the thing is simultaneously very structured, but also sort of floaty. Like, remember those old Allsop soft ride bikes that were complete garbage? Like the same idea, but it actually works, right? And I've used one. I used it at Steamboat Gravel last year on the Black Horse, which is 142 miles. It's like 230K or something. I don't know how many Ks it is exactly, but like it was unbelievable. Really worked well. So, and literally it's just a sheet of carbon. There's nothing on it.
Right.
And what Neil and I were speaking about was the idea that the Gelu allows, I think it supports the sacrum in a way, not directly, but it supports I don't know. I can't actually explain it, but it feels like the ischium are more free to rotate. We have a little more movement in the SI joints, but without sacrificing central stability.
Right. I see what you mean. Yep.
Which is and it took me a long time to discern that when I started switching back and forth between SMP. I've been on the Forma forever.
Yep.
And I love that saddle. Like, it's a good saddle, and I've used it. I've been on SMP since 2013 now, and I have it on all my bikes: road, mountain, track, cross, gravel, everything. But I started trickling in some Gelus. And what I was going to say is I keep spelling it wrong out loud when I say it. I keep saying Gelu. It's Gelu. So if you search Gelu composite saddle Portugal, you'll find it. For people who have been looking and asking me, like, what's wrong with you? You can't spell, which is probably true. But so it's an interesting idea because it just seems to allow, it's like somehow feels centrally very stable, but the SI joints have this like, it feels like the leg can drop more freely, but not in an unstable way. And I've never felt another saddle like it, but they're definitely not for everyone. And some people get on them, especially I think women get on them immediately. And it's just, even with the pliability or the mobility in the carbon, they're like, whoop, get that thing away from me. It's just too brutal. So I would love to hear your thoughts if you get a chance to try one at some point.
I should get on one. I should get something sorted out and try it out, because I've been curious about them for some time, and I'm sort of the same as you now. I've been riding SMPs for probably a similar amount of time for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm pretty much riding dynamics for now, but I rode the composite for quite a long time. I can pretty much jump between the two without too much trouble.
Okay.
And occasionally I've stuck a seat on and got on it, and I just thought, back to the SMP. There's been nothing really to sway me, but well, I'll definitely check it out. It sounds a wee bit like what you're saying. It sounds almost like the pelvis is moving more like it would walking or without being on a bike,
which has to be the goal, right? But still stable.
But still supporting you, like holding you in place.
Yeah,
that's what it sounds like.
I mean, you said it also earlier as well. Like, cycling is such an artificially learned movement pattern. It has nothing to do with anything we were designed to do evolutionarily. Nothing at all. It's a disaster. I mean, you compare walking, running, or sprinting, or anything we might do in nature, like throwing or lifting a log, or fighting in a lion or whatever. I don't know. Like, none of that has to do anything with cycling. Cycling is exclusively sagittal plane, limited range of motion, concentric movement only. There's no training of any tonic or stabilizing musculature. It's only phasic, but of course you require tonic musculature. So, and then you put a saddle under someone and you restrict their movement in certain planes, but not in others. And we just basically artificially choose those planes. And I've sort of worked out which ones are, air quotes, good to have a little movement in and which ones we don't want. Right. But, I mean, it's still a truckload of adaptation. Then you put a shoe under someone's foot that's got toe spring and heel rise and a little bit of an arch, but cramps their toes. No wonder your feet can't feel the pedal on a bike. I mean, it's a train wreck. It's a train wreck, all of it. So here we are doing all the things, putting little tiny wedges of plastic under people's feet and taping bits of footbed under their arch to try to get them to be more symmetrical. And half the time I'm like, well, we should all just be riding around in sandals on flat pedals and then getting off periodically and running up a hill every once in a while to reset the nervous system. But anyway, so cool. Okay. So you and I had a great conversation a while ago. You started it, actually. You sent it to our Fit Collective, our Steve Hogg Fit Collective, and you sent a podcast from a guy named Jack Kruse. Well, he was the guest on the pod, and the pod was Rick Rubin's podcast. So if people don't know who Rick Rubin is, he's a music producer who's worked with everyone from, I think, Trent Reznor to Snoop Dogg to, Pink Floyd. I don't know, like every major earth-shattering rock star in the world or band, Rick Rubin's probably produced at least a few of their albums. So he's this legend. And now he started this podcast. And his podcast is great because there's no preamble, there's no intro, there's nothing. He just starts talking. And then he has the weird commercials for the House of Macadamia, which are like super old school. They're hilarious. And so I love it. I might steal that format. But because, I mean, how much intro do you need? Like, just start the conversation, right? I don't know. I guess when you're Rick Rubin and you're talking to Trent Reznor, you need less intro. People don't know who I am. But so, and so this podcast, this guy, so most of Rick Rubin's guests are people like Trent Reznor or other musical people, or occasionally as people who do other sports and things, just people he's come into contact with. But Jack Kruse is a friend of his and his doctor, and Jack Kruse is a neurosurgeon. Yeah. And they brought on this pod Dr. Andrew Huberman. Yeah. And in case people don't know who Huberman is, he's a neurologist. He works at Stanford, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Stanford, yeah.
Professor at Stanford, and he's got also his own podcast and channel. He's really well known, so I'd be a little surprised if people hadn't heard of him. But if you haven't and you want to check out his stuff, he's a really interesting guy. He's pretty heavily left brain science minded. He's definitely referring to a lot of science in his discussions and his teachings, and he's got his own content. He's got a lot of very good practical advice. So he takes the science and he does a really good job, I think. I've listened to some of his stuff. Some of it starts to drive me a little bit bonkers because he's so science heavy at times. But I've learned things from him, and I appreciate his message. He'll give you like a practical application. Like, okay, I'll talk about all this science about what light does for you and water does for you and things like this. And then he'll say, okay, here's what you do with it. Get up in the morning, drink this much water, go for a walk outside, etc. You know, wait to drink your coffee, etc. Things like that. And he explains why. Neurologically, he'll tell you based on the neuroscience what the idea is behind that.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting, apparently what's been happening, you'll pick this up on the podcast, is that Jack Kruse has just been pretty much like beating up on Huberman on Twitter in particular, apparently, about how wrong he is about a lot of the basic concepts that he teaches.
Yeah.
And this is not a trivial point because Andrew Huberman is a very, very well-educated person.
Yeah.
But Kruse is like, you're wrong on this and that. And he's just been brutal. And so now the connecting the dots is Rick Rubin, who comes from kind of another genre, but he brought these two guys together and was like, look, I just want you guys to have a conversation. Yeah. So they ended up recording 2 podcasts that I think were like 2.5 hours each.
Yeah.
So it's a long pull. And full disclaimer, like Jack Kruse he's a polarizing personality, like a lot of good teachers are. He's very direct. He's very brutal. You and I, we had conversations on our email thread about how much of an egomaniac is versus how much he knows. And there's a real discernment that has to happen there. Yeah. But I would love for you, Garry, to talk about, you sent a great email synopsis. Some of the guys on the thread were like, I can't listen to this. It's 5 hours of stuff. Can you just distill it for me? So you sent I think it was 10 points of the basic idea of what Jack Kruse's philosophies are. So if you wouldn't mind kind of giving us your perspective on all that and maybe boiling down those points. And then I'd love to hear how you practice some of these things in your life. You live in Glasgow. Jack's biggest tenet is sunlight. That's his single biggest thing, is like get more natural sunlight, especially at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, right? So how do you handle that problem?
Right. Well, where to begin, really? So I would say Jack Kruse is, he talks about light, water, and magnetism as his kind of this is the base of all that he talks about. So my journey to Kruse kind of came through the applied movement neurology paradigm, which I worked with in my fits. So he was quite heavily referenced within that material, and that's how I sort of came about getting involved with Kruse. But I think for me, there's probably pre-2020 and post-2020, and for me, my approach to, and I'll use the term biohacking here. Some people don't like it. Personally, I do. I think that's what I'm doing. That's pretty much what people are doing when they employ these things. But I would say, I basically in 2020, late 2020, I was prescribed a course of fluoroquinolone antibiotics, and I don't know if you know much about fluoroquinolones, but they're effectively napalm for your mitochondria. So I had a course of these antibiotics, and they messed me up to really, really bad, actually. And so I had, I would say probably, I couldn't walk 4 miles without feeling like I'd been run over. And probably not even a mile. I would say if we look at ourselves like a battery, I would say I was about between 15 and 20%. For 2 months. For 2 months, I was absolutely flatlined. I was 6 months out of the game. And, you know, my heart was, my resting heart rate rose by 20 beats a minute. You know, I was having palpitations. I was in the hospital, in the cardiology department overnight, getting checked out there. All you know, it was a nightmare. It was horrible. And I have my, you know, I think I understand how I ended up there. We talk about diet, talk about light, talk about, you know, my habits, my living habits prior to this. But it really knocked me on my arse. And so, you know, I went to the doctor. I said, look, I don't feel great still. You know, they've discharged me, said my heart's absolutely fine. It's tip-top. Took blood. Everything's perfect, you know. And this was during COVID, and they're like, you'd be better out of the hospital. And I was like, right. So, you know, I'm like, my heart's pounding in my chest morning to night. And I go to the doctor, and they're like, oh, well, you know, stick you in some beta blockers, you know. And it's like, well, I'm not taking beta blockers, you know. Like, I've been told my heart's fine, you know. Like, can we, you know? And I visited the doctor a couple of times, and basically they told me in no uncertain terms, you know, enough money had been spent. They'd done the tests. My heart was fine, and that was that.
Yeah.
And I was not fine, you know. Like, but anyway, so that aside, so I was on a vegan diet for 2 years prior to this. So I'd been vegan for about 2 years prior. This happened almost. So it was the 4th of January I went into hospital, so it was around about the, you know, the shortest day of the year here is, I don't know, it's like, it's probably sunrise 8:30, 9 in the morning, sunset 3:30 p.m. So there was no light, you know, it was the worst time of the year.
Yeah.
And so I started to look at information about these antibiotics and, you know, what they do to you and everything else. And so I started to look at Kruse's, the Jack Kruse stuff, the references on his blog. I was looking at DHA. You know, started to read up about DHA. So I introduced fish back into my diet. And I actually naturally started to feel an improvement when I moved sort of more Paleolithic in eating, if you want to call it that for just now. So get rid of the grains, get rid of the carbs, get rid of this stuff, start eating fish. And I felt a bit better. It was less problematic. I felt worse on the laptop. I felt, you know, worse in certain environments. And I started to look at blue light as well. So the effects of blue light on circadian biology, on DHA in the brain. So I started to look at Kruse's stuff, and I started to sort of, I knew about these things before, but I just didn't properly, you know, practice them, if you like. So then as things evolved, I started to kind of really go down the rabbit hole, and I changed a lot. And I'm 2.5, 3 years on now, and I'm maybe 85% of the way there, I think, but I'm still not right. And interestingly, the podcast that I sent you guys, that host, the Australian boy, had his following podcast was a guy who'd been floxed. That's the terminology for people who've been sort of damaged by these antibiotics. It was an Australian guy, and, you know, 7 years on, and his story was basically the same. He'd came to Kruse, he'd done the mainstream route, he'd done the centralised medical route. You know, if you look on Facebook in these places, there's massive groups, you know, for people who are floxed, who have taken these antibiotics and been damaged. You know, the FDA recognises fluoroquinolone associated disability as a thing now. So ruptured tendons, damage to joints, you know, the side effect. There's a list of side effects. The length of your arm, and the problem with this is people look at you and they don't really understand. They don't really understand what's going on. If you start talking about mitochondrial DNA to your doctor or to anybody else, it's like they're out of your system now. get out of my office. It's pretty much the, and then you're left to your own devices. So down the rabbit hole I go with Jack Kruse, and I started to employ some of his methods, and that would be, so I was off work for 6 months. So I would get up in the morning. First thing I'd do is I'd open the door, and I would get light in my eyes, depending on whether the sun was out for a period of time relevant to the amount of light exposure. And in the evening, as soon as the sun set, I would move to a different set of blue blockers, red ones that completely eliminate all blue and green light. I changed the bulbs in my house. There was no blue or green bulbs in the house. And I was beginning to sort of look at light as a way to reset the system for sleep effectively. And during that time, I never set an alarm clock. I went to bed at the same time every night. I woke up at the same time every morning, and I slept all the way through. And I started to control these things by using light. So for anybody out there, I mean, I can provide you with some links for some of this. There's software you can get for your laptop called Iris, which you can control. Mine's it changes throughout the day depending on the time of day it is. It'll change the colour temperature, and at night everything's red effectively. You can do it with your phone. There's some hacks for your phone. And so really I started on this. I started to eat a lot of fish. I started to control the light environment. And then I started to, see some improvements with this stuff. And so as times went on here, I've experimented with ketogenic diet, fasting, and then I got into the red light. So at this latitude, it's really problematic. We just now, I don't know, the sunrise is maybe 4:30 a.m. and sunset's 9:30 a.m. or whatever. You can't see the sunrise every morning, and it's not even warm enough in July in Scotland sometimes to go out and expose all your skin to red light in the morning. So for those listening that don't know, red light, infrared red light, particular frequencies of red light, have been shown in thousands of studies to be beneficial for rejuvenation and the health of mitochondrial DNA. So the reason I'm kind of talking about mitochondrial DNA in this context is fluoroquinolones dismantle it. It's napalm for your mitochondria. There's plenty of studies out there that can be found, and now I'm convinced now that this is the problem. So I really started to look at light as more of a the long road to recovery in this story. And I think what I was talking about in the email threads with you guys was, in the winter months here, I'll typically head out to the Canary Islands, and I come back. I'll normally get out maybe a couple of times through the winter. I come back in March there from Tenerife after 10 days. And it's the best I've felt, in the last few years. And basically, I'll rent a place in the East Coast of the island. I'll get up every single morning, watch the sunrise. I have a high-fat, high-protein breakfast. I'll head down to the beach. I'll get in the cold water, and then I'll basically lie from the morning for virtually pretty much most of the day in the sun. And I'll be in and out the water, and control the light at night. And the single biggest impact to my health is doing that. Infrared light and ultraviolet light. has completely changed how I feel. And the way to look at this is like, if you think about mitochondria, the powerhouse of powerhouse of the cells and what produce ATP in the body, and effective. One of Kruse's references is a guy named Doug Wallace, and his work pretty much shows that mitochondrial dysfunction is the seat of pretty much most disease, if not all. And so, the reason I'm taking this approach is based on these studies, based on this information. So Jack Kruse is, you come across Jack Kruse work, and he's talking about fluoroquinolone toxicity. He's talking about fluoride. So it's fluoride in the antibiotics, and he talks about fluoride's impact on cells when it gets into cells, and so when you begin to understand these things, I've incorporated so much of this stuff into my life now. It's funny, earlier this morning, I'm sort of having a look through some of the stuff I could talk about in this podcast, because it's what you're going to ask me about. And when I look at the stuff that I do, it's not normal what people would consider normal. It's not, but it's a necessity more than anything else. And it's really interesting to experience the differences in your body when you've got this issue with mitochondrial DNA, because everything that he talks about makes an improvement to how you feel. Everything. And so, I mean, I'm pretty convinced by what I've read, what I hear, and what I see at Kruse, and it flies against the mainstream narrative in a lot of ways. Cover yourself in suntan lotion. Stay out of the sun. It's really bad for you. It's the opposite pretty much of what we're being told by a lot of centralized medicine. It's the opposite of what's being told, yet it's the thing that has had the biggest effects for me. So fasting, the difference, fasting like so. And I had to learn all this myself. I find that if I fast, I feel significantly better. So that led me to, the ketogenic diet. And obviously, when we're fasting long enough or in ketosis, we have autophagy in cells, and we're getting rid of all the bad stuff, or we're rejuvenating, regenerating cells. Yeah. And it's no coincidence that these things make you feel better, So, and unfortunately, it's been a journey for me that I've kind of walked alone. The forums and things are too difficult to be on. People there are peripheral neuropathy, their hands are burning, they're disabled, they're really messed up. And it's difficult to read these people's stories. So, and I kind of feel lucky, actually, that I'm as fit and healthy as I am by comparison. So for me, typically, I try to control my light environment. So blue light, Kruse talks a lot about blue light and its negative impacts on the eye and on DHA in our brain and in our heart.
He uses the term blue light toxic, actually.
Blue light. Right? Everybody's blue light toxic.
I mean, in this day and age, how much time we spend on computers and phones and indoors. So it's just a question of how much, right?
Totally. And I think I mentioned this in an email. As far as I see society and people within it, the human, the body is so good at adapting that we become familiar with what we've adapted to, and that becomes the new baseline and the new normal. And
this is the same in bike fitting. It's the same problem. Totally. People come in, you ask them, like, how's that saddle? Like, oh, yeah, it's fine. They've been riding on a Arione or some piece of garbage, and then you put them on an SMP and their head explodes because they're used to, that's their baseline, is they deal with discomfort. And I'll say, I think there's a bigger thing here. Sorry to interject for a moment, but if we look at old school cycling, like really old school, Robert Miller era cycling, this is a speech I give a lot of my clients because I want them to sort of be aware of it. I think there's a broken paradigm that still exists, and it was stronger then, but it still pervades today. And the paradigm is all suffering is good, and it goes in the same box.
Yeah.
So you went out, whatever, January 1st, you went up for your first training ride, or December 1st if you were a pro, or whenever it was. And you go and you ride 100K for the first time in a month or two. And you get home and everything hurts. Your legs hurt because you just rode 100K for the first time. Your lungs hurt because you went hard on one hill. Your neck hurts because you're not used to the cycling position. You haven't worn a helmet. Your balls hurt or your lady bits hurt because your saddle is the wrong saddle, but it doesn't matter. And your feet hurt because your shoes are a size too small because they're new and they're leather, and you crank the toe clips down. And this is the old school way, and your knees hurt because who adjusted cleats back then or had footbeds or anything, right? You just dealt with it, but it all went in the same box, which was all suffering is good, HTFU, like this is training. This is how you become a good cyclist. And this is a broken ass paradigm that we have to assassinate, in my opinion. Like, we're smarter now. We have saddles that don't make your junk fall asleep. We have the technology to make handlebars that are the right width, that ergonomically support your hands and your shoulders so you can have a somewhat neutral shoulder. We have shoes that fit better. We have footbeds. We have cleats that don't make your feet fall asleep, etc. So, but people need to learn to cleave unnecessary suffering or pain or discomfort from that which is just simply part of practicing the sport. If you're going to go ride as hard as you can up a 3,000 foot climb or a 1,000 meter climb, okay, we expect you're going to hurt afterward. That's the point of what you're doing. If you're going to pick up heavy objects, your legs and glutes are going to be sore, right? So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Like, there's a broken paradigm there, and it's the same thing I think you're saying with blue light toxicity, with people who get up and they run, their vitality score is, if you look at it, like you said, a battery 1 to 100, if they wake up and their normal is 41, and then one day they drink 3 cups of coffee and now they think they're at a 52, or they spend a little bit of time working in the yard for whatever reason, and it goes up to 69 for that day because they're in the sun and they're breathing fresh air, and maybe they decide to kick off their shoes, so they're grounding, and they get their hands in the dirt, and then they're outside, and then they feel better. Those are the bits we need to redefine and pay attention to, is that raising your baseline, right? And having less of a tolerance for thinking that 41 out of 100 is normal.
Totally. And it's understanding yourself, it's understanding your own body. And it's very difficult to get a baseline when you're actually within this false world. It's like, I mean, so now if I was to watch the TV now at night, I mean, it's like burning holes in my eyes,
right?
And I'm so acutely aware of the negative impacts when I'm too close to the laptop now, or I'm out with that circadian, good circadian cycle that I've got happening, and I'm so acutely aware of it. And I think I mentioned in the emails as well, and I don't drink any alcohol, haven't done for about 3 years, and I don't drink any caffeine now either, because it affects the way I feel. And I've also been another thing, I do a lot of meditation. I've been doing that for 5-6 years, and I believe that these things bring you in tune with what is going on inside yourself. And when I look at society and I look at the way that it's operating, it's it's so far away from how I feel now, and I know because I was there before all these changes. So I run on 6 hours sleep and 6 coffees a day, and I thought that's normal, and and you're buzzing at night, and I just don't sleep very well, and whatever it is. But I kind of tend to look at things now, and I think from a cycling point of view, to bring this to cycling, because I think I mentioned this as well. When I talk about this to people, it's predominantly from the point of view of, if you really want to enhance your performance and really look at the marginal gains and the things you can do, dealing with your circadian biology, in my opinion, these days is right up there. I mean, it's right up there. the difference between 8 hours sleep and 6 hours, for anybody who doesn't know, is because they're drinking too much coffee, they're doing whatever it is that's masking them discovering the results. Because if you train in the gym enough, if you ride the bike enough, and if you are in tune enough with your body, you're going to very quickly be able to see the difference between how you perform after 6 hours sleep and 8 hours sleep.
Yep.
And 6 crap hours sleep and 8 good hours sleep. And you know, it's there. I mean, I know people use gadgets and all the rest of it to monitor this stuff now, but I don't. I just, you know, so, and I can tie these things in because I'm observant and aware of these things. And for people maybe who are not quite aware of circadian biology, it's fundamentally, you know, if we look at this cycle of the day, it's when you get up in the morning and you get sunlight in your eyes, it sets off a chain of events, if you like. So we entrain light through our eye, it hits some photoreceptors in our eye, fire into a part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and this is a clock in the brain that governs all different systems in the body. So the visceral system, the endocrine system, the gut, you know, and every single cell has little clocks, and they're all, this master clock governs how these clocks operate. And what happens in the morning is it says release some cortisol, release some adrenaline. It's morning. We're going to prepare for, you know, what our activities for the day. And we need to become alert. We need to become focused. You know, we need to go hunting. We need to do what the day has in store for us. And so it kickstarts these systems in the body: the gut, the cardiovascular system, the visceral system, the endocrine system. And this isn't trained, and it's supposed to be it is directly relevant to your environment. So the light coming in your eye. So throughout the entire day, for all you just see light out there, different frequencies of light coming through your eye and tell your body different things. So when you hit midday, we've got ultraviolet light, we've got the peak blue light, we've got, you know, sort of effectively our most heightened awareness. We're ready to do work. And as the day progresses, the opposite happens and the systems begin to shut down. And if we look at food as well and when we should eat and things like this, we're really designed to eat in hours of daylight. So if you think about circadian biology, you want to get your last meal in here, and then when sun sets, you know, another big thing for me is not eating anything probably within 4 hours of going to sleep, in the hours of daylight, and controlling your light environment. And if you do this, the systems of the body are going to unwind. The gut in particular doesn't want to be digesting things when you're trying to sleep. It doesn't want it's not happy to be working all the time. It needs a rest as well, you know. And these systems shut down, these hormones decrease in the body, and you prepare for sleep. Effectively, what blue light is doing for your screen, for your phone, you know, I'm not really keen on this, put your phone down half an hour before bed and all this jargon as well. It's like, try to, you know, think about this as an environmental thing. When there is no light out there, depending on your latitude, your circadian biology is supposed to be in line with the environment that you're in, whether that's Scottish latitude, Costa Rican latitude, whatever. So what we're doing with the use of this technology, with the use of these LED lights, we're firing this blue light into our eye. The photoreceptors are not brains, they just sense the light, and they tell the suprachiasmatic nucleus it's 12 o'clock midday. And so we have the release of hormones, we have the negative effect, and so, like, we need stress hormones. They're there for a reason. We don't need them all day. You know, we don't need these things to be running all day. We should have a cycle. And so the blue light toxicity is this depletion of DHA, which blue light, this peak, I think it's 440 to 455 nanometers or something. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it depletes DHA. So, you know, Kruse is big on fish, you know, as part of the equation and biohacking and dealing with this blue light toxicity caused by, the gadgets and the technology and the stuff that we're using. So this has been kind of foundational for me. It's completely revolutionized my sleep cycles and how I feel in general. And it's funny because I believe that the non-native electromagnetic frequencies that we've surrounded ourselves with as well are part of this problem, a big part of this problem as well. And people, I think, are just unaware because they're surrounded by it of the impact that it's having on them. And I think because of the way I feel now, I was never sensitive to any of this. I was never sensitive to carbohydrates, never sensitive to coffee, never sensitive to the laptop, and now it's particularly problematic for us. So, that's the kind of the light thing, and I'll use a sad lamp in the winter and stuff as well some mornings to kind of kickstart things off. But it's really biohacking in the sense I'll use this light specifically to do these things. I'll use these blockers. I'll use the lights in my house, the Iris software, the stuff in my phone, and the blockers to control, because I understand what's happening, the impact that this stuff's having on my circadian biology. And so, I mean, this is just some of the things that I do now, but it's been quite a journey to go through. But getting back to the sun, the red light devices are good. You need to watch when you use them. I typically use them early in the morning or closer to sunset, because that's when that light is in the environment. If I use a sunbed, I use it midday, and because that's, you can you can affect your circadian biology with exercise, food, light. These are the things that are kind of driving it. And I know if I eat something too late and the next morning I'm like, oh, what's going on? And I'm like, oh shit, I had something like last night at 8 or whatever. And I seem to be quite sensitive to food close to bedtime. 3-4 hours is good. Under 3 hours definitely has an impact. And so to bring it back to kind of cycling, if I was really trying to cross the T's and dot the I's, I would be looking, into maybe some of the links we can provide or whatever, into how you can go about controlling this circadian biology as best you can, wherever you are, to allow yourself to sleep, and because you will be quite amazed at how shit you are sleeping. If you're not doing these things, but you're just taking it for granted. It is a new norm, and I really think everybody's living this way. Like they're sitting watching flat screen tellies to whatever time, got the nice new LEDs installed. On the phone, on the tablet.
I was going to comment on that. The modern LED lights, I think the profile on those is worse. It's far worse than an old school incandescent bulb.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You look at the nanometers of different wavelengths, the LEDs, and they're super efficient. They use less energy, so there's all these arguments. And you go to a home store, whatever. I don't know if you guys have Home Depot there. You probably yeah. So it's all the same shit. It's the same shit everywhere. It's like all these LEDs that are just the profile of the nanometers is
peak blue light,
super peak blue light, because that's what gives us our everything. We're thinking like a TV producer. Everything has to be on a big screen TV. When you're watching Avatar: The Way of Water or whatever you're watching, the blacks have to be super black. The blues have to be. It's not enough to just have it be blue. We have to have it be this blue that stabs you in the eye. These reds that are insane. Because when you watch stuff blow up on TV, or you're looking at some hot chick running down the beach or whatever you're watching, we want it high def. We want more, and it's a problem that's infiltrated society. Like my wife and I, we have a few restaurants that we go to that are like farm to table locally. We hunt those out, and in Boulder we're lucky to have a lot of those, because we cook a lot, but every once in a while you just want to go enjoy a nice meal. But even some of the restaurants with our local chefs, everything, it can't just be a burger. It's got to be a Chipotle, green chili, bacon, smothered organic local grass-fed burger. And you're like, dude, like there's a lot of flavor in just grass-fed beef. Why do we have to annihilate it with all these spices and flavors? So looking at our environment, I think this is part of the reason is the background noise of how many Wi-Fi networks can you see when you click on your little Wi-Fi logo, right? How many are you that if you can see it on that list, that means your body is dealing with that magnetic stress. And then we're watching movies on our high def TV, and the movies are everything's blowing up. Everything's, going at 900 miles an hour. and then we're assaulting our eyes with these environmental background. We consider them background things, but they're not really background. They are a frontal assault. We assault our taste buds, right? Our food, our water, our air, everything is just elevated with things that challenge our system.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what your journey, if I had to zoom out and look at your journey, like you hit the antibiotics you took definitely were the big hit from the sounds of it.
Yeah.
But now you're in a place where you've been given this gift, which is this recognition of how much your environment has challenged your body, and you're starting to dismantle that and arrange it in a way that allows you to have authority and agency over your environment. That's the word I hear is you're taking agency over your light environment. For me, sound is a big one. I don't know. Are leaf blowers a huge thing where you are? Like people laugh when they hear me say this because I'm like the leaf blower crusader. I hate leaf blowers with a passion. They're like, what are we doing? Let me just break it down in case this isn't intuitively obvious. They're so noisy that the operator has to wear headphones. Like, why in the hell would you ever intentionally manufacture a device that's that noisy in 2023? Like, come on. How enlightened do we have to be to figure this out? So what are we disturbing when we're walking around with this thing that makes like aircraft level noise? Right? Oh, and it's a 2-stroke engine, which is literally was invented in 1904. So it's like the least efficient engine in the world. Again, it's 2023. Like, why does this even exist?
Yeah.
And we're doing it to what? To blow our leaves into my neighbor's yard. So that tomorrow he can blow them back into my yard. Like, it's a freaking leaf, man. Like, what the hell? It drives me insane. So noise pollution, right? Light pollution. And then one of Jack's other things. Sorry, I totally hijacked your line of thought.
No, it's cool.
His other thing is water, right?
Totally.
And it's being in touch. Ultimately, the more removed we are from our natural environment, our water environment, our light environment, our being in nature, price to our health. It has to. This is natural law. Like, this is an axiomatic truth.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really beautiful that you're on that journey. But one more point I'll make is, this is my own observation. I think ultimately the goal, hopefully, is that we as humans, organisms, individual in our biological spacesuits, we can be robust enough to go through the world and occasionally stay up till 2 a.m. and not have it completely wreck us.
Yeah.
I'm not, occasionally have a glass of wine, occasionally eat a piece of pizza. Like, there's most pizza I won't eat. It's just garbage. But there's some nice pizzas out there that are made with local grains and stuff, right? Heirloom organic local grains. Like, this is total hippie stuff. But so I want my system to hopefully be to the point where it's strong enough to where I can handle some of that and not fall to pieces. But the initial part of the journey is, first, you've got layers on layers, like you were talking about. You're probably sleeping like crap. You're drinking too much coffee. You're drinking too much wine or beer, or worse. You're not outside as much. You're eating foods that are laden with toxic oils, right? Which is any seed oils, basically. Yep. You're not eating organic food, etc. You're drinking water that's got chlorine in it and fluoride and God knows what else. Other people's prescription drugs, which do not get filtered out by a local municipal water plant, right? So you have traces of other people's antibiotics and birth control pills and God knows what else is in there. So they don't test for this stuff. It's just, this is not rocket science to figure out what's coming in your water. So you're buried in layers of these things. And then we start to dismantle that and we pick it apart, especially if it's precipitated by a health crisis, which it sounds like you definitely went through. So we dismantle that step by step, and we figure out which ones are triggering to us, and then hopefully we regain a status of health that is robust enough to where then, if some of those things come back into our lives, we're okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so we can become less dogmatic. No, I'm not saying you're dogmatic. I'm saying, but there's a point when we have to be really like, it's like, man, I am in bed at 8:30 every night. I don't care, hell or high water. Yeah. Then there's a point where we can say, okay, I can relax a little bit because my health has got a bigger baseline. My how do I say this? My baseline of vitality is more like an 85.
Yeah.
And on days where I nail everything, it's a 96, but I'm okay with it going down to an 85 here and there because we also have to enjoy the dance of life.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. I mean, I have noticed, so the way Kruse talks about it is, like if you use the sun well, it allows you, there is leeway, to do these things. If you're very sick and you're getting better, there's some, to adopt his way of doing things, I think people are going to resist it and they're just going to dismiss it. But I think for the people that really take that on board, because a lot of the time it means moving location to another location. If you do this stuff and you build your redox potential, as he talks, back up, I look at it like a battery. So like it's this battery. The sunlight is charging your battery. I filter all my water as well. You put good water in, you get good sunlight. I only eat organic meats now, and seasonal local fruit and veg and lots of fat. But it's all regenerative farming. It's all I eat a lot of fish, and this is working great. Lots of fat. The mitochondria, you can get twice as many electrons out of fat as it can carbs. They like fat. So, so this is the way I eat. Super clean, but I've got a sweet tooth, and that's my thing here, that's like, if I go out for some food that I'm like looking at that sticky toffee pudding and I'm thinking, having that, so it's like, that's my weakness in all of this. But for me, it's very difficult for me here to do what I know I need, and that's, the Canaries, for 6 months, and I think the battery would be both. I'd have a buffer again. So it's gradually been like 2 steps forward, 1 step back for me.
Yeah.
And we had a particularly good June. It was like 3-4 weeks, and I was out every day, like 4 or 5 hours, and it was doing this. It was 2 steps forward, 2 steps forward, 2 steps forward. You can feel it. You can feel it within yourself.
Nice.
As much sun as I can possibly get, and it's doing this. And so I know that is the solution for this, and I get that as and when I can. And I've got the red light panel here. I use that, but there's a lot of EMF and stuff comes off of these. It's not ideal. Right. It's not the same thing. But it's part of the routine, and it's helped as well. But there's just no substitute for that sunlight. And so,
what type of red light panel are you using, just out of curiosity?
It's a Helios, but I think I'm going to sell it and get an EMR Tech.
Okay.
EMR Tech. I think that's I know Kruse talks about these a fair bit, and I think they're pretty much EMF. You're not getting a reading, because the closer you get up to these, the better. And
right, but then you're right in the field of
you're in it, and I can feel it on this one.
Do you have a meter? Are you testing things like around the house?
It's on the list.
Yeah,
I don't have one, but I've hardwired everything in the house.
Oh, you have? Yeah.
And there's no Wi-Fi or anything in the house or whatever. But so that's another thing. I use these Pranon devices. I don't know if you've seen them. It was another thing that came through the AMN. It's a passive transducer. It's graphene nanotechnology. And the idea with this is that it converts non-native EMF to native EMF, anything within the range of the device. And there's a couple of, when I was looking at this stuff, the general consensus for me was that mostly it's like your supplement industry, it's like hype. It's like, oh, we'll protect you with this, and there's nothing really backing it, and there's no science, there's no studies. The prana stuff has university studies behind it, and I think it's Oshman, James L. Oshman. I think it's Oshman. He's done a lot. He's got a couple of books there.
Okay.
He's done a lot of work in earthing. And so I had a couple of his books there, referenced in the AMN as well. And when I seen this stuff, I thought, right, I'm going to give this a go. So I used.
Sorry, what's the company for those?
It's called Pranan Devices, Pranan.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one. We have some devices that we use to try to help with EMF, but I'll check that one out. Pranan Devices. I'll put the link. Just so everyone knows, I'm going to put links for all this stuff.
Yeah.
In the pod, I'll put your website, obviously. I'll put the link to Jack Kruse's podcast with Rick Rubin. I'll put Kruse's site in there. I'll put a link to AMN in there.
Yep.
And then I'll put I'll put a link to Iris, which is the software we use on our laptops. I've used that for years. The other thing I want to mention about Iris is it changes throughout the day, but it also controls the flicker rate of the screen, which I think people don't always. So this is the difference between, you can buy a lot of bulbs that have, for example, a red coating over them. That's not the same as buying a bulb that actually produces a better wavelength profile that is more heavily skewed towards red light and lower in blue light, or low or no blue light frequency. There's a difference there. So we have to be a little discerning about the stuff. If you do want to put some bulbs in your house for evening reading or whatever, or, doing whatever you're doing, laundry and stuff, you got to be a little bit discerning in that. So the Iris changes the flicker rate. So there's a flicker that happens in our computer screens that's imperceptible visually to us, but you can actually test the response of the Iris to it. And this is one of the reasons why when you work on your laptop for so many hours, you get smoked and your vision starts to go bad, because you're basically, those muscles are just trying to adapt to that flicker. Responding all day, right, to that input. And this is not how light comes from the sun. It doesn't flicker, it's constant. So one of the many ways in which the unintended consequences of technology have started to mess with us, right? Ooh. So, yeah,
absolutely.
Cool. And then there's one other thing I want to mention in the biohacking pile. I think I read this just recently, and this is one of those things I read where when I read it, I was like, why hadn't I kind of connected these dots previously? But it was brilliantly simple, which was, this guy wrote, I don't know where I saw it, probably on a post somewhere or a blog. He wrote, if you're using an alarm clock to wake up in the morning, by definition, you are sleep deprived.
Huh.
Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that, it's so obvious when you hear it, but it's true.
Yeah.
So, okay, we all live in the modern world, and there are times where we have to use alarm clocks to wake up. So how do we do this? How do we solve this problem? If you want to not have blue light exposure at night, okay, we use some filters on our phone and stuff, but most of us do the same thing. We use our phone as our alarm.
Yeah.
And that means you've got a phone next to your bed and it can't be off. And yeah, you can put it in airplane mode, but I'll just be skeptical for a moment. I think even in airplane mode, there's quite a bit of data transmission happening between phones and towers and things, because Google, Microsoft, and Apple are all really, really, we'll say, desperate to track your whereabouts and your activities to a degree that you probably don't even want to know. So that means even airplane mode isn't really airplane mode. I'll just say that. However, there's a product called that's made here in the U.S. I don't know if they can ship internationally. I think they can. It's called One Clock.
Right.
ONE clock. And it's a clock that is exactly what it should be. When you try to solve this problem, when you have to go to get up in the morning, if you look on Amazon, the alarms that they sell there that are not plugged into Wi-Fi, which is a very small category, are all complete train wrecks. They're all disastrous things with bells or loud beeps. And this is not the way to get up, right? You don't want to be disturbed from your sleep with an alarm, an actual alarm waking you up. This is like, talk about spiking your adrenaline in the wrong way and bringing you into fight or flight. Let's jump out of bed, getting kicked in the ass right away. Terrible idea. So one clock makes a clock that's a brilliantly simple solution. It does plug in, but it's not Wi-Fi. It's not connected to an app. It's not digital in any sense. It's an old school alarm clock, and it wakes you up with this very gentle music that's been specifically composed to bring you out of a state of sleep gently. And when you use it, it's a really nice tool. It's a really nice way to solve that problem. It's the only tool I found that sort of fills that niche in the market that we need, a way to wake up without being jarred or without using our phones. So I thought I'd mention that. I'll drop the link to that as well.
Totally.
Yeah, cool.
I'll look into that. I know I've downloaded some sounds like the sea, whatever. There was an album I downloaded in iTunes. It was specifically for the purpose of, exactly as you say, waking up more gently. And for some reason, my car automatically connects to this now every time
you get in.
so it's like these tranquil sounds are coming on every single time I get in the car, and it's quite amusing. Like every time we get in the car, I'm like, right, cool. But it's definitely a nicer way to wake up in the morning. Like I'm totally with you on that. Like, you know, it's like it's not good. It's not good.
No.
Yeah.
Cool. Sorry, now I don't know where we were. You were going to say something else, and then I had to go into link mode just to tidy the things. Oh, we were talking about the Pranan devices, and you're talking about managing EMFs, right?
Right. I mean, this is the difficult thing, you know. I've used earthen sheets, I've got earthen mats, and I'm not convinced by them, and I tend not to use them anymore.
Okay. Did you use one in bed under your mattress, or?
I was using a bed sheet for a while, and this was round about when I got sick with these antibiotics, and then I stopped using it then, and I've never put it back on since. And I have a few of these mats. I'm just not convinced that it's good to be on them in the house with the gunk that's floating about in the air. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, by far the best ways, you know, I like to get into the water, like into, you know, some pools or loch or whatever, or you know, ideally the beach or whatever, and really earth that way. Interestingly, Kruse, I noticed in a podcast recently, was going on about melanin protecting from both heavy metals and then EMF, like electromagnetic frequencies. So, you know, I think like nature has its way of, you know, dealing with these things and protecting us, and it comes back to light again, and it comes back to sun, and but as far as this goes, I've got tinnitus as well, which has came about, which is notably better when I'm out in the forest, or I'm at the beach, or I'm, you know, on an island off the west coast of Scotland, as I was at the weekend there, to what it is when I'm here in town and stuff. It's difficult. It's difficult to get away from this. You know, workplaces, like you say, you know, I've just moved studios. I went to a studio. You know, I open up the laptop, and there's 15 Wi-Fi routers popped up there, you know, to join there, whatever. And I'm like, this is like, you know, brutal. And it, you know, what kind of annoys me about all this stuff, 5G, Wi-Fi routers and repeaters just appearing in the workplace, appearing in the shopping centres, appearing everywhere, is like, you know, nowhere were we consulted on. Like, it's just, here you go, have this, and it seems bizarre to me that, like, it's not necessary for a start off, and you know, it seems that we have a blasé approach to this, sort of like, oh well, you know, the tech companies say it's fine, and so it must be fine, and you know, and it baffles me, you know, why there's so much of this. But it's the one thing, you know, the Pranan devices, I've got one on my phone, I've got one in my pocket, I've got a big one in the house, and you know, I'll try to earth outside these days, you know, as much as I can, but it's a difficult one to manage, because you know, they're firing 5G towers up everywhere down this road, and you know, there's when you look at this, there was some petitioning and whatever, but you know, I've looked in the Scottish government are just basically, oh, you know, this is how we advance. This is, you know, technologically where we need to go, and it's a bit like, well, is it? Is it? Because you know, really see what it's providing that we didn't have before. But you know, it seems to me like big pharma and the oil industry and tobacco industry and everything else, it's like big tech is, you know, controlling the narrative for us, and people like accept it because it's the easy thing. It's the easy thing to do. And for those that are affected by it, you know, electrosensitivity or that are bothered by these things, they're suffering away, and you know, don't really have a voice. You know, they're just the quack in the corner, you know, like tinfoil hat and whatever else, you know, and their experience is denied. There's nothing worse to have your experience denied, you know, like you know, it's not a nice thing, and that to me is, you know, what's happening here. And it isn't until it's overwhelmingly a problem that these things tend to get looked at, you know. And I think we're heading that way, you know. It's like eventually people are going to wake up and realise that the food that they're putting, you know, food's got a lot to do with this. Don't get me wrong, but it's you know, it's got a lot to do with it, you know. But it does come down to electrons, and it does come down to there's much more going on than this. And why is it that people in all these different diets and people that are doing are all getting sick? As you know, neurodegenerative disease, heart disease are just like, they're on the rise. Rise, and we need to look at, you know, why that is, you know. And it's just always a story about food. It's just a food story, you know, all the time. It's a food story, and I don't really see how we're going to get anywhere unless we start to look at it a bit, you know,
a bit bigger, look at more causes. Yeah. That's really interesting what you were saying about people having their experience denied. I think that's speaks to a point that I've made to a lot of my clients, which I think is really important for us also as bike fitters and as coaches. We live in a world where there's a lot of tension between knowledge and practical experience, right? Between book knowledge or internet knowledge or whatever source you're getting it from, and having an internal knowing or understanding. And it's so easy for people to be overwhelmed because whatever their experience is, they have knee pain or back pain, and whether that's on the bike or whether it's just back pain while they're sitting at their desk, or they have no energy, or they're drinking too many coffees, or they're sleeping like crap. So what do? They go on Google or whatever search engine, and they start consulting Dr. Google, and they get a plethora of information from, you know, experts. Some of them are influencers on Instagram, and some of them are people who actually know what they're talking about. And maybe they're people who are influencers who do know what they're talking about. There's a Venn diagram of all these bases of knowledge. Or they go to their doctor, their Western doctor, and the doctor's like, yeah, okay, I can give you antibiotics or a sleep aid, a prescription sleep drug, which I do not recommend in any circumstance. Or, you know, they give you some other thing. They're just trying to band-aid the solution as best they can. If it's a problem that falls outside of, you know, a broken leg or a stent, like that, Western medical is triage, right? So when you go to a Western doctor, a Western style doctor, generally speaking, they're there to put femurs back together, and they're great at that. And we need them for that, right? You get in a car accident, you go to the hospital. But if you go to the hospital when you're not sleeping, there's a high probability they're not going to be able to help you with that problem, because the system is not designed to help with that type of challenge, right? So, but here's the point that I want to really emphasize for people, I think is critical, which goes to what you're saying about experiencing being denied. All this expertise that we can consult, whether it's Western doctors or Chinese medicine or you know, holistic practitioners or holistic health practitioners or a bike fitter, anyone who's got a level of expertise, no matter how well studied they are, how many letters they have after their name, how many years they've been fitting, 10, 20, 30, etc., there's one area in which their expertise can never trump yours. It can never usurp your own level of expertise. And that is your own experience of living in your body, right? You, like you, Garry, or you, Bob, Susan, Frank, Marcia, whatever, you as an individual have this unique experience of being in your body. And that domain of authority is untouchable. It is unchallengeable. You know what works for you. What really starts to, I'll say, concern me is when a client comes to me and they use the language a lot. They say, I just don't know. I don't know. And when they're talking about things like saddle height, I'm so lost. I don't know. And I'm like, you know more than you think you do. Yeah. It's like you're paying me to tell you what your magic saddle height is. You probably know that better than I do in some ways. Especially once I give you the right things to listen to, that's how I can help you. I can say, what are we listening to? You're listening to this cue and that cue. And then maybe you need some video occasionally of your hips, but you know more than you think you do. So I want people to really hopefully take this message home that they have a lot of authority over their own experience. And that's exactly what you're speaking to when you discovered, you started to figure out how important light was for you. That authorized your experience, yeah. and it really fed it. So I think it's so easy for people to get lost in all the externalization of their power and their knowledge, and that's understandable because right now you and I today could learn more in one day on the internet than someone in 1899 could in their entire lives. Yeah. Like we have access to so much information. But that information doesn't mean anything until you experience it. Yep. Then it becomes true understanding. Yep. So, anyway. No,
listen, you're preaching to the converted. If the last few years have done anything, solidify that for me, which is, listen to yourself, trust yourself. The world is, we're conditioned, I believe, unfortunately, to pay undue respect to paradigms that, are not really necessarily there to serve us particularly well. So it's like, people are helpless. Like in this situation, you're presenting this way here, I'm helpless. And it's like, well, and I've been told I go to the doctor in this circumstance, and I go to a teacher in this circumstance, and I go to a police officer in this circumstance, and I immediately hand them that autonomy and that wisdom and that intuition that I've got within myself over to them because of who they are, like to the bike fitter because of who he is. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. And disregard their innate intuition for, well, is this police officer like corrupt? Mm-hmm. Is this doctor drunk? Is like, this teacher any good? Or like
you go to the doctor and they're overweight, they've got unhealthy skin, they've got bad breath, they've got bags under their eyes or circles under their eyes, and they're offering you health advice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and it's funny, we're kind of getting to this because this is nagging me a bit. There's a very popular podcast host who recently I listened to him talk about a podcast. I listened to him on a podcast, and he was talking about how we should basically put our trust in those who are, more qualified than us in certain areas, is effectively what he was saying. Mm. And I was like, sort of like resisting, like I'm like, no, we shouldn't, like, yeah. And and then I listened. I was at a festival in May there. It was a science and philosophy politics festival. There were a lot of speakers there, and there was a psychologist speaking there, 30 years as a medical doctor and a trained psychologist, and he's got a website called risk.org, which is, his name's David Healy, and he's got a website. You can put any prescription medication in it, it'll tell you the side effects and so on. Mm-hmm. And he told a very interesting story that highlights for me, I like stories, but exactly, I think what we're talking about here, and it was he was prescribing antidepressants at the time, and it was a female patient who had come back to him and said, you know, like, I've got no sensation down below anymore. And he's like, all right, well, we should, you know, we'll stop this medication, we'll do it. And blah, blah. And she's like, well, no, it's been like a number of months now. And he's like, all right. And then she was describing how, like, you know, really aggressive stimulation, there was no sensitivity. She had no sensitivity whatsoever, couldn't feel anything. And so he was like, as a doctor, he was like, oh, like, and she was like, could it be the such and such an antidepressant? And I can't remember specifically what it was, but it was like boron or something that initially, like everything, like, so fluoroquinolones were used in the Gulf War on troops to protect them from anthrax. They reckon fluoroquinolones are what caused Gulf War syndrome, all the problems that so much like you know, these drugs getting tested on the military, this particular compound in this particular antidepressant was actually for desensitizing the body. And she says, could it be this? And so he was like, well, it could be this. I mean, this is what it's used for. And the point he was making, that was, just because he's a doctor doesn't mean that a patient doesn't have it within them when they've been deeply affected to research this to the point they know what's going on with it. And having, you know, the ability as a doctor to say, well, actually, they know more than I know about what this, because they've been affected by it. And there's a problem here with, you know, Western medicine, in the regard that it's, you hand over the autonomy to them, and they say to you, we've spent enough money on you, you know, your resting heart rate, 84 beats per minute's fine, we'll give you a beta blocker, you know, like, and you saying, well, could it be this? And them going, system, you know, so like, I would encourage people, like, you know, to, you know, to believe in themselves, you know, if something like that, you know, develop that intuition and self-awareness and ability to trust yourself and do what's right for you, rather than, you know, hand this power of it is almost across to people, you know, just because they've got a PhD or whatever, you know, it means they can remember things well, you know, like it's not a mark on their position over you in terms of, you know, where this power lies or whatever. So I feel quite strongly about this stuff now, because I see it everywhere. I had it with many doctors in this process, but it's not just in that. It's a societal thing, and it's sort of introjected upon us as this is how it is, you know, that this police officer will be respected, this doctor, you know, should be held above you in this regard. And, you know, and we develop that, and it's within us, and we end up not knowing what's good for us. And it's important to know what's good for you and to stick to your guns, whether, you know, because science, the problem is, like, we're looking in bite fitting for technology, answers in technology. We're looking for answers in you know, places these days that there's too much opinion coming at you. And, you know, we've got scientific study here that says this, and a scientific study here that says the complete opposite here. You're the person that needs to decide for you. Yeah. But what's right for you? Not the study, not the, you know, the opinion of somebody who appeals to you on Instagram who's an influencer or whatever. Has to be you. And you have to learn that. And, you know, that I feel strongly about. I feel people should develop this intuition, and I would recommend meditation as a starting point, you know, for that, and to clear out the caffeine and the alcohol and the, you know, these, and really, you know, develop that self-awareness, and it will help you no end. Yes. Forward. Like that's I feel strongly about that, you know. It's like, it's something I think people should think about. That's a great point. If they haven't already, you know. If you haven't, get clean, get quiet. Yeah, right. That's the essence of
taking a step forward in your own health, I think is the first step is sweeping your own doorstep.
Yep.
Right. In Paul Chek's system, the order of operations is I, we, all. I being looking after yourself, because, and then the we is your family, your close friends, your close work colleagues, and then the all is everyone else ultimately on the surface of the earth, and even the people floating in space, if there are a few right now, probably. But you have to prioritize that order of operations, because and then some people hear that initially, that paradigm, and they think, oh, that's really selfish. You should look after others before you look after you. That's not the case. If you want to be the best bike fitter, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, dad, mom, you want to be the best son, daughter to those people you really care about. You start by looking after your own health, because health is the baseline for everything. It's a baseline for athletic performance. It's the baseline for loving other people, expressing your dream. So when you simply make the goal to allow space for quietness and to sit in your own stuff and begin to look inwardly through meditation, and you enable that through clean diet, clean water, exposure to light, then that's the first step, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Essential.
I believe that, and you can feel selfish within yourself for taking that standpoint after however many years it might be before you adopt that standpoint. I'm being selfish. I'm putting myself first, and this is all. This is the reason we run into these problems in life is in the resentment and the, if you read any, I don't know, Gabor Mate's books, or if you start to look at this kind of stuff, we start to see the disease in people who have this approach, of I'm not important, everybody else is more important, and so these are extreme examples, but it is fundamentally, and we've seen it in society in the last few years. When you learn to when you realize it's no selfishness, and you can accept it and you can deal with that, and then it's the first step beyond, walking in there, because it is difficult to do it. I mean, I'm speaking from experience, because there's a resistance there. Oh God, I'm putting myself first. But when you look at your history, you'll see what you've done, when the reasons subconsciously you've done things you've done because you didn't. You come into this world, you have these needs, and you need to meet them for yourself. Otherwise, it's a road to ruin. And absolutely own house in order. You have the resilience to look after others close by, and then collectively as a unit looking after, outwardly into the world, into the workplace, into your clubs and people you interact with, and that it's the way. I completely agree. I would echo that. I would echo those points for sure. It's somewhat I've arrived at as well. Again, more in recent times, is understanding this. So I don't know how it sounds in the podcast context, but living it, understanding it, and being that is it's important.
Sure. Yeah. Garry, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your story and tell us all about everything you've been through and your thoughts on Jack Kruse and biohacking and all those things. I agree. Some people don't like that term. I'm sort of try to be language neutral. I know Steve hates the term saddle. He prefers seat, but I still call it a saddle.
Yeah.
So we all have our niggles and quirks, our verbal quirks. But also, I have to tell you that I remembered spontaneously about 20 minutes ago who it was that won World Road Championships in 1986. I don't want everyone to think I'm a complete buffoon when it comes to my cycling history. It was Moreno, Argentine.
Right.
And I remember the picture of him crossing the line in his Italian jersey. That's how I figured it out.
Awesome.
Visual memory to some degree. Awesome. Visual learner. So,
thanks for having us on, Colby. It's been great. I wasn't expecting to be sitting here discussing these things with anybody at any time, so it's been good to have the opportunity, and hopefully there's stuff in there people can take away, and check out the links, check out Kruse, think about think about these points, because they're worth thinking about. And actually, I'm open to, if anybody's got questions or would like to discuss this with me any further, or then feel free to contact me. I'm perfectly open to it. If there's any questions or anything, I'd be
great.
I'd be happy to speak to anybody who's
great. Okay, what we'll do is link your website, Garry, in the podcast show notes for sure, and I'll CC you on Instagram or tag you on Instagram, and then people can find you there, and they can reach out on Instagram or whatever. I think they can get your email probably off your website.
Yeah. Yep.
And tell people your website, please, so they can find it as well. If they want to look right.
It's www.garrykirkbikefitting.com.
Okay.
Garry with 2 R's as well, actually.
That's right. Yeah, Garry with 2 R's. That's important. Yeah. Okay. And then you're on Instagram as well. I think it's Garry Kirk Bike Fit.
Yeah.
On Instagram.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. That's it.
Okay. Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and insight.
No worries. It's been great. Thank you for having us on.
Okay. All right.
Cheers, man.
All right. Thanks.
Cheers.
Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of Cycling in Alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues, other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.